Good morning and welcome to the Chamber of Commerce, Southern New Jersey's virtual Women's Council meeting. My name is Christina Renna and I am President and CEO of the Chamber. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Last year, the Chamber's staff and Board of Directors reflected on our organization's strengths and opportunities for improvement to set the course for the future of our organization. That process concluded with the Chamber unveiling a new mission statement, vision statement, core values, as well as internal strategic priorities aligned with these concepts. One of the Chamber's 6 core values reads as follows: the CCSNJ fosters an inclusive community that embraces the diversity of the companies, organizations, and individuals we serve. To that end, we created 2 different councils: the Chamber's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council, as well as the Chamber's Women's Council, to reflect this core value in our programming that we are offering members. Some of you may have participated in our inaugural Women's Council event, which was held on March 25th. It was an in-person event, so we got our first meeting in before COVID hit, and it did feature Frances Blanco and the team from the state's Division on Women in the Department of Children and Families, who led a really interactive discussion on topics such as transformative policies, practices, and approaches that companies can use to empower women and how women can overcome stereotypes in the workplace. The feedback and momentum from that session was incredible, but then COVID hit and we were forced to step back and identify a virtual program that would both be timely and informative as it relates to women in business. As the COVID crisis continues to impact our day-to-day lives, both personally and professionally, the Chamber decided that a timely discussion would be one on women leading during a time of crisis. Over recent weeks and months, there have been several pieces that have been published on this topic, from the New York Times to more local outlets like ROI New Jersey. And we thought it would be interesting to explore how women leaders bring their own unique approach and techniques to leading during a chaotic professional time. We are so thrilled to feature 3 incredible female leaders from the South Jersey community: Assemblywoman Pamela Lampett of the 6th Legislative District, Tony Pergolin, President and CEO of Bancroft, and the new Dean of the Rutgers Camden School of Business, Dr. Monica Adia, all of which will be introduced momentarily. We hope you find today's program both enjoyable and informative. But before we begin, please allow me to thank the sponsor of the headline sponsor, I should say, of the Chamber's Business Council series, which is Witham. Thank you so much to Witham for your generosity and your sponsorship of these councils. And of course, I would like to thank our Women's Council sponsors, starting with Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey, New Jersey Manufacturers Insurance Group, PNC Bank, Parker McKay, South Jersey Gas, and Thomas Edison State University. A huge thank you to all of these great corporate citizens whose generosity has helped the Chamber continue to navigate the COVID-19 crisis for all of our members. A few quick housekeeping items before we begin. In a minute, I will formally introduce today's panel, and we will hear from them one by one. So first, we're going to hear from Assemblywoman Lampett, then Dr. Monica Adia, and last but not least, Tony Pergolin. After I introduce each speaker, they will provide 5 to 7 minutes of comments about what it means to be a female leader during a time of crisis. Once we hear from all 3 speakers, we will open up the program to Q&A and pose the questions we receive to all of the panelists. So throughout the duration of the program, as right now as I speak and during the course of the hour-long program, the chat function at the bottom of your screen will be open. Our panelists, and as our panelists speak, simply type your question in the chat. If you have a question that's specifically for one panelist, note that, please. If it's just for the collective group, also note that as well. We're going to get to as many as possible after we hear from the panel. If after the event, there's another follow-up question you may have, please feel free to include it in the survey. We will email you at the conclusion of today's event, and we'll be sure to get you an answer from whichever panelist the question is geared towards. So with that bit of business out of the way, let's get started. Our first speaker is Assemblywoman Pam Lampett. Assemblywoman Lampett represents the 6th Legislative District and serves as the chair of the Assembly Education Committee and as vice chair of the Assembly Financial Institutions and Insurance Committee. A friend to many tuning in today, including me, Pam is currently serving her 14th year in the legislature, and up until 2 sessions ago served as the chair of the Assembly Women and Children's Committee. The Assemblywoman was most recently, well, not actually most recently, but recently the sponsor of New Jersey's Equal Pay Act, which the governor signed into law last year, as well as the Earned Sick Leave Act, which provides sick leave for employees to care for themselves, a child, or a family member. Thank you so much for being here, Pam. Assemblywoman, the floor is yours.
I am going to unmute myself. Well, good morning, everybody, and always thank you to the Chamber for being so creative about how to bring the messages to your members and provide information that is timely. So I thank the Chamber. Happy to be on this esteemed panel with my really good friend, Tony Pergolin, and my new friend, Monica. Really thrilled to be able to share some thoughts today about how women work differently in crisis. Many years ago, I read the book, The Tipping Point from Malcolm. Hold on, this is like crisis. Like nobody's here in my house to answer phones. The Tipping Point from Malcolm Gladwell. And I realized that little things, small things, can really add up to being very significant and impactful. I think in many ways that we always look for, what certain issue or change can be, hitting a very large community of people. Sometimes those are very large issues and they do take some time to make a difference. I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, first of all, thank you, Christina, for mentioning, equal pay. That one took a while to get done, and earned sick leave, again, took a couple of years or more than a few years to get done. But one issue that's happening today in every household is telehealth. And this was an issue that took a long time to get done, about 18 months to move through the legislature. But, I just had that sort of feeling that this was going to later on be very, very useful to those who are living in communities like what Bancroft is, and long-term care facilities, and to remote areas. But who knew that today telehealth was going to be so embraced and so necessary to continue to provide medical oversight to our communities. So the tipping point versus the smaller issue, growing into a larger, component. At that point in time, I thought it was a small issue, but here it is. It has made such a difference for those that want healthcare and have no means to be able to get out because we were under, requirements to stay home. I think that just as women, we are. I'm not saying that men aren't compassionate, because my husband's very compassionate and he's not in the room. So somebody should tell him that I said that, Karen Elkis, if you don't mind. And so I think that women just feel a little bit more compassion. And, this day and time where there's such job loss and the people need that to now start reinventing themselves. And we saw where the gaps were in everything from a pandemic planning or an organization planned for something major like Hurricane Sandy and things of that sort of nature. I think we had those sort of operational plans. But every time that we went through some sort of crisis, we've always sat on a panel to say, what could we do better? We were in the throes of it when we had to say, what can we do better? We didn't have the luxury and the time to wait for this pandemic to end. We had to do it on the fly. So many things from an educational standpoint we needed to do. We needed to allow their 180 days to be provided not within schools. We needed to provide funding, for PPE. And my good friend, Tony Pergolin, who's so passionate about what she does, everybody should read her book. But, when the state decided to disperse funding for the direct service providers, they did it for adults who provide the care to adults, but they didn't do it for the direct service providers who give it to children. And it was a collaboration between the leadership at Bancroft, legislators like myself, executive leadership that really kept the beat going because we were passionate about it and because we knew it was going to make a difference in quality of care. So the governor applied $9 million, and now Tony doesn't have to explain to a direct service provider why they're getting paid less if they're taking care of a child versus an adult. We were doing things on the fly. Sometimes we realized, I believe, at that point in time as women, that the need for who's sitting at your table as to who's making the decisions with you became so vital. And relationships are part of that. And so if you did not work on building your relationships across the aisle, through the various sort of industries, you were not capable of being able to have the network that you needed to be able to make these sort of decisions on the fly. You know, there were industries that are here right now watching that are going to be devastated still. And I ask for you to, you know, reach out to us, talk to us about how you feel your industry needs a different type of support or redirection, changes to regulations, changes to laws. I mean, this is what we're working on day in and day out right now. From colleges, which everybody knows, you know, I work at Penn, the heavy decisions that Monica in her leadership role is going to have to make, you know, with the chancellor, it is, you know, unprecedented. And we've heard that word so many times, but really there's no guidebook to decide, you know, how do we educate our children, be it K through 12 or be it higher education? You know, what are these changes that we're going to have to make? You know, but so the insurance industry, I know we've got people who are listening right now in terms of the insurance industry. And I believe that they, you know, we just moved a piece of legislation yesterday in education in reference to expanding requirements for insurance to cover students who have graduated, okay, but they're not really graduating physically until maybe July or August, to cover them under the K through 12 insurance plans. So there's so many aspects of what we needed to have our network. And I think that women do this very well. We do it very differently than men do. And I believe that it's with that and the compassion that we bring to the solutions and knowing the fact that we don't have all the answers. I can repeat that one again. We don't have all the answers, okay? And we're fine with saying that helps us to reach out and find the better solutions for our community. So I think I've gone past my 5 to 7 minutes. I think Christina notified me. So I'm happy to answer any of your questions, which I'm sure you'll have many. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Assemblywoman, and you were great. You were perfect on timing, so thank you so much. So next we're going to hear from our next panelist, who is Dr. Monica Adia, the newly installed Dean of Rutgers Camden School of Business, which was announced this January. Dr. Adia assumed this role after serving as chair of the management department at Marquette University's College of Business, where she served on the faculty since 2002. Dr. Adia is a proficient administrator and noted scholar in information systems, and her research interests include participation and experiences of girls and women in information technology careers, which, as we all know, is a severely male-dominated field. I had the pleasure of meeting Monica virtually several weeks back, and upon speaking with her, knew right away that she would be the perfect fit for today's discussion. So Dr. Adia, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to turn the virtual floor over to you.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you for that welcome. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks also to the Chamber for organizing this great panel and for this opportunity. So just to give you a little bit of background, I started my role as Dean of the Rutgers School of Business at Camden on March 30th this year, just 2 weeks after Governor Murphy delivered the stay-home orders. So my perspective today will come from taking up a leadership role in the midst of crisis. And so sometimes I will note that while it's easy to slip into mulling over the challenges of such transition during crisis, it is always humbling to think of my colleagues who have pivoted in the middle of an intense semester while handling dual careers and young kids. So if you hear me complaining, you won't hear me complaining, is the way to say it. To give a bit of an academic spin, crisis management often has been described across several phases, from early detection of an emergent issue to prevention and preparation for the crisis, to containment and damage control, and eventually to recovery. So you kind of think about it in a cycle. And depending on the crisis, this cycle can be short-lived, it can be a prolonged experience. Often the transition across these phases is rapid and complex, as was the case for COVID. We are collectively still reeling from what hit us. And as a friend who's a historian noted a couple of days ago, it feels like we experienced the 1918 pandemic flu, the Great Depression, and the Civil Rights Movement all in a matter of 2 months. So it feels like the world's burdens are on our shoulders. At other times, crisis is slow and brewing in ways that the leaders have an opportunity to react and respond with greater consideration. What does make things complex for a leader is the transition across these crisis phases are ambiguous. And because of the varied needs across these stages, it really demands a portfolio of leadership skills as opposed to a few traits. So as you well know, transitioning into a new role at SBC in the middle of the crisis, the expectations from a leader taking on such roles are no different from those who take over roles under normal circumstances. So along with dealing with the fluidity of the crisis, a new leader must still comprehend the inner workings of the organization, build trust with internal teams and external stakeholders, refine the communication and the vision and around this, the communication around the strategy, and how the organization is going to grow and transform through all these times. So I'll note 3 things that have really helped me in the last 3 months. The first one that I would say is remaining flexible and adaptable. I took over my role at Rutgers School of Business in really what would be the end of the prevention preparation stage into more of the containment, damage control stage. And typically these stages require agility, creativity, clear and positive communication, risk-taking, and rapid decision-making. And I tend to be a decision maker who likes to be data informed and understand the situation before I jump into a decision, where crises don't allow that luxury. And so I had to adapt my style to work with available information, even if it was incomplete, and rely on the wisdom of the collective, especially those who had a good understanding of the organization and its culture. The second thing that's helped me is trying to maintain an even keel and a positive style. So sometimes remote work and having to deal with damage control and recovery without knowing my teams and without having had the chance to gain their trust has been really frustrating. More difficult has been making decisions without this foundation of full trust from your team. But one trait that I've consciously developed over the years is that I don't dwell on what is beyond my control, but rather focus on moving forward and looking for ways to respond and address the problem. And if I can remain positive, my teams will draw from my strength. And so for that reason, I've tried to remain positive and communicate positively as far as possible. And then the third thing that I'd like to speak to, and Pam alluded to that in a lot of what she says, and I think both my partners in this panel are a very good representation of this is servant leadership. And to this I'll speak a little bit more because both my personal and educational background have been influenced greatly by principles of servant leadership. So just to provide context, servant leaders, they tend to invert the traditional leadership model and put employees and their constituents at the forefront. So respect, trust, and empowerment of individuals are very central traits of a servant leader and are great for unlocking the creativity across teams and developing a sense of commitment. Pam alluded to compassion, and that's a very critical trait of servant leaders: humility, empathy, and reliance on the collective wisdom of the teams, listening to others and sending the message that the constituents matter and their perspectives matter. So under situations of crisis, this approach of servant leadership can help employees remain inspired, develop the confidence and a sense of security under certain uncertainty. And the collective sense of security that you can develop in your employees can be very beneficial in forward-looking actions that can aid with the recovery phase of a crisis, which is typically the final phase. Being a servant leader requires a lot of courage and practice because it means giving up control. It also means being open to feedback from your teams and not to view that as criticism, but a desire to improve their organization. So I would say these are three traits that have really helped me during this transition phase. What I will say is that I've thought a lot about whether these traits are greatly present among women versus men. And I would say, I think any leader who possesses these traits and is able to develop on them can be a very effective leader. The advantage that women have is that the social expectations and the norms of being a parent and being a sibling and being and playing multiple roles through your life do help us develop those traits a lot more proactively and in very subtle ways that they become an inherent part of us. So while I say that social norms have kind of driven us to developing these traits of compassion and empathy and servant leadership, I think any leader, male or female, who can develop these traits and practice them can be an effective leader. So I've taken a lot of time. I will end with a couple of cliches. The first is leadership is not easy, but more importantly, leadership does matter. So thank you for your time, and I'll exchange some ideas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monica. Such great tips and advice, both from the Assemblywoman and from Dr. Adia. We really appreciate your remarks and spending time with you. And for so many people tuning in today, this may be their first chance to virtually meet you. So we're happy to have given you that platform as well. So thank you. So last but not least is another wonderful friend to the Chamber and to me personally, Toni Pergolin. Toni is the former treasurer of the Chamber's Board of Directors, but is still actively engaged on our Board of Directors currently as well. She serves as the president and CEO of Bancroft, one of the largest human service providers in New Jersey and the greater Philadelphia region. Her ability to lead nonprofit organizations with a focus on delivering excellence with a healthy margin has resulted in a decade of profitable returns, enabling reinvestment in the organization's mission. Toni shares this journey in her recently published first book. I say first book, I don't know if there's one, Toni, but I'll say
no more.
Okay, Too Important to Fail, Leadership Lessons for Nonprofits, which is available today. And actually the information for the book will be in the chat function if you're interested in exploring that more. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Toni. Toni, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christina, and good morning, everybody. As my fellow panelists have said, I really appreciate the opportunity to be talking to you all today about leading in a crisis, because we're in one now, and I'm pretty certain there's more in front of us. So it's great to be able to share insights, to learn from each other, and always to really be reflective once you get through your crisis, to really think about what was in your toolbox that really helped your work. Really enjoy being on the panel with my very good friend, Assemblywoman Lampitt, and my very good new friend, Dr. Adia, and really look forward to welcoming you to South Jersey. I'm sure you will find the Chamber very, very helpful tool for you as well, as we all have. So, Really interesting. Going last here, I have to say that I have the very exact theme that my two fellow panelists have. So there's certainly some key takeaways here. So I've been at Bancroft now for 16 years, and I have had the opportunity to lead through quite a few crises. And when you get through the end of the crisis, you really think about the tools in your toolbox, right? I mean, as leaders, you always got to go right to your toolbox whenever you're in a new crisis. And while you need different tools for different crises, I have to say that the one constant tool that I've always pulled out in a crisis is that the emotional side of leadership, right? So Dr. Adia, you spoke about servant leadership. Assemblywoman Lampe, you talked about caring and compassion, relationships. It's all of those things tied together. And to me, it's really our ability to tap into that emotional side. And and I agree with you, Dr. Adia. It's not that men don't; they absolutely do. I've worked for many male leaders who were able to do it. But I do think for women, it's just a much more natural side of us. It's just something that's already inherent in us. So let me give you a few examples, and then talk about the theme, and then some examples. So, when I talk about our emotional side, I talk about being caring, compassion, and empathetic. And when I think of the current crisis, this pandemic, I've watched people with high anxiety about it, and some with not at all. And you have to really relate to your staff, to your constituents, and with those that are anxious, they got to know that you care and that you're empathetic to that. And the ones that aren't, they need to understand that we care about you too. How about the social injustice crisis we're going through, right? I mean, all different kinds of perspectives. You have to meet your staff in the middle. They have to know you care, because that's how they'll follow you. And even when we went through a financial crisis, there were some people that were very, very anxious about that, right? It's their well-being, and they just need to know that you care and that you heard them. And so caring, compassion, and being empathetic, I think is critical through a crisis. The second one is really putting value to the relationships that you've already built, and really remind you just why it's so critical to spend the time we do, and the Chamber helps us do this, really building relationships. And the Assemblywoman gave you a great example. I was in the middle of a crisis. I didn't have to call her and say, oh, by the way, here's who I am, and here's what I'm doing. We already have a really great relationship, and she jumped on it in a minute. And I got to tell you, I was facing a crisis. Half of my staff was getting a raise, and half of my staff wasn't. And that half of the staff, I was being caring and compassionate with them. But at the end of the day, I really need help. And that's what relationships allow you to do. So really building those relationships, and then not being afraid to pull them in. I mean, that's, we need each other through crises, and we want to help each other. And then finally, and Assemblywoman talked about this as well, you don't have to know all the answers. You don't have to be the hero of every crisis. You really don't. You have to really understand who in your organization knows how to do this. And you need to empower them and stand behind them. So let me give you some examples. So, as Christina and Assemblywoman shouted out for me, and I appreciate those shouts outs, I wrote a book. And in my book of Too Important to Fail, it really tells the story about when I arrived at Bancroft 16 years ago, and I stepped right into a very significant financial crisis. Now, I'm a financial person through and through. And so there's not a lot of emotion in finance people, right? It's black or it's white. We never see gray. And so, when I arrived, you either have cash or you don't. There's no in between. Bancroft did not. You either are profitable or you're not. Bancroft was not. So from my financial, intellect, I checked all the boxes of, this is a formula for closure, for bankruptcy, for merger. I mean, that's why I came, and that's what my mind tells me to do. But then my emotional side kicked in. And I really took the time to really learn and speak and really relate to the people, the many, many faces of Bancroft, right? So I met the families, and I heard about how much they depend on this organization. And I heard about how Bancroft had made such a difference in their lives. And I met the people that we serve who are just they're living their best life because of Bancroft. And I met the staff who are really just dedicated and compassionate about the work they do. And so I kind of had to like move that intellect aside and say, you know what, I need my emotions to really take the lead here. And for sure, it takes courage and you take some risks. But what I really saw that it did is people wanted to follow me, right? Leaders are only as powerful as the people who follow them. And when they see that you care and that you're compassionate about what they're doing, they want to step up and help you do anything they can. So, you know, it's balancing that intellect and that emotional side and really making sure you're seeing it clearly. But for sure, the emotional side, I think was a key part of my success through that financial crisis. So let's talk about the current crisis, this pandemic. So, you know, I know how to lead through a financial crisis. I got all those tools in my toolbox. I know exactly what to do. But when it comes to a pandemic and how to keep 750 people who live, children and adults who live in our group homes, and 2,000 staff that have to work directly in front of them, like, how do I keep them safe from a widespread pandemic? I don't have that tool in my toolbox. I don't. But what I do know is that there was an individual in my organization, our chief clinical officer. She does have those tools in her toolbox, right? She has infection control, a whole staff of people. She's got nurses. She's got clinicians. They knew exactly what to do. And I empowered her, and I really stood behind her. I mean, she needed support through it, and that was my role. My role was to be in the background of this. And I really saw her take the lead. And, you know, I'm sure like many of you, we had daily calls. There were 30 people on that call. And I got to tell you, not one person ever missed it. Because when you're in a crisis, people need a leader. They need somebody to tell them what to do. They need places to ask questions. They need help. And she was that person, not me. And she really took that lead. We had strong communication, another really key ingredient for success through a crisis. People need to know what's going on, what's happening, what do I do, where do I go? And so, you know, our leader really empowered our communications team to really step up. And we also had great technology, I have to say. And again, to her credit, she really empowered them. We put together dashboards really quickly so that we could predict where we might see a positive case. And, you know, we're taking temperatures, so we could see temperatures were on the rise in this group home, and boom, we had cleaning out there, we had PPE out there, and we could react really, really quick because we had the dashboard in front of us. And so, you know, I really saw that in a crisis, you need not only a leader, but the right leader, the people that know what they're doing, and people will follow. And they will really raise to the occasion. I mean, it's amazing, our frontline staff, you know, they never waver. They never said, we're too scared. They said, you know, get us there, give us the tools, and we're all in. Now, I have to say, there were some moments through this crisis where my emotions were pulled. So the families would call and say, this is too hard. I haven't seen my child in 3 months, and it's his birthday, or it's my birthday. And that emotional side sometimes is really hard to fight. But you know what? I trusted our leader in this, and she said, you know what, we gotta stay, you know, in lockdown until we're really ready to open. And I'm happy to say we're almost ready to let our parents in, and I'm very excited for them to be reunited with their kids. But, you know, in summary, I think, again, like everybody's saying, when you lead through a crisis, you know, typically they show up quickly and very unexpectedly. You're never really prepared for them. But I do think being able to tap into your emotional side, you know, sometimes I think people think it's a weakness. Sometimes people think like, oh, I don't want to look like I really care. But ultimately, caring and being empathetic and letting the right people lead and counting on your relationships is, I think, how you get through it. And I think that this has been all, you know, I think this is a great theme here that we all have. And like I said, I'm pretty sure there's another crisis that once we get out of this one that will be right. And I think we'll all be better for it. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Toni. And it was so interesting to hear the overlap between all three of you.
Mm-hmm.
There were similarities through all three of your remarks, and also some interesting differences, I think, based on the industries in which you serve and the positions that you hold in the community. So that's why we asked you all to be a part of this, because we do agree that there are so many common threads as it relates to leading at any time, but especially leading during a crisis period like one we're in now. So at this point, we are going to move into the Q&A session. I would ask if you have any questions. There are a few that have popped up, some comments as well. Feel free to throw them in the chat. I would ask Monica and the Assemblywoman, and Tony is already off. If you're on mute, go off mute. And we're just going to tick through some, kind of dive a little bit more into some of the themes that we heard from you today. And, most of you probably tuning in know this, some of you may not, but one thing I am very proud of our chamber is that, we are, a business organization, and we are an 11-person all-female staff. We've been female-led for the past 25 years with my predecessor, Deb DiLorenzo, which many of you know. I'm here now trying to fill her footsteps, but we still have an 11-person all-female diverse staff that really, I think, uniquely positions us in some ways to help the members of the business community as female members of the business community and leaders in our own right. So this is very much an interesting discussion for me personally as well, as a leader of a team of all females as well. So all that being said, and you all sort of touched on this, but I'd love to dig in a little bit further. Just the word crisis in itself, is scary, right? It incites nerves, anxiety. So how do we spin these crisis time periods as a leader into a positive? I think you've all touched on themes like, really communication, leadership building, or listening, and then the relationships that come from it. But a crisis is a crisis. It's a scary time. So how, as a leader, do you take this scary time and make it a positive for the people around you, whether it be personal or professional, your family, your work family, whoever it may be? Who would like to take that first?
So, yeah, I'd like to, because I think as well, when you put together this panel, you were trying to highlight the pandemic, and along the way, this country is now facing a larger issue of race, excessive racism, and the death of George Floyd, and what we need to be doing as leaders in this sort of crisis. And it's not as easy as finding $9 million in the budget to give to Tony to pay her staff equally. This is a change in a movement that we collectively need to be more ambitious about, talking to people, reaching out to people that we wouldn't have normally done, to listen. Somebody wrote, listening is so important. It is. It is the most important thing for me, is to listen. When I tell people, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a doctor. I didn't grow up saying I wanted to be a politician. I can cook an amazing dinner for you, along the way, a lot of other things too. But, that's what I can say I do extremely well, and probably do better than some other people. But at this point in time, I can't just surround myself with other people who do what I do. I have to surround myself by other people. I think that through the pandemic, you say, how did we uplift, and how did we communicate, and how did we change things? So many people were within their households, and all they were getting was the news and the media, and all they were getting was bad news, bad news, bad news. And they were feeding in support of each other, within their own households. And that's really hard. So I think I knew that, even before the George Floyd situation. So, one-on-ones with my staff were vital before. They were heightened. And now it wasn't just about, did you get your work done? What project did you work on? It was about emotional intelligence. And I believe that this emotional intelligence, is a buzzword. Now it's reality. And how do we bring emotional intelligence into our college environment, into our work environment, in our K through 12 environment? And how can we do it even better? We talked about how to find something, you're in your house with your loved ones. And sometimes you can really be like snippy and everything else. And I think that each day we just, as a country and as a household, we need to find something to say positive to each other each day. I believe that, and that doesn't come, unfortunately, naturally to a lot of people. And I believe that that's something that, from an empathetic standpoint, we collectively need to do different. So, instead of getting on the phone call with my staff, either a staff meeting or their one-on-ones, or in my senior leadership meetings or whatever I'm doing, it's how are you? Before we jump into anything, where's your mind today? How's your heart doing today? What did you do well for yourself today? And so I think that those are the new nomenclatures of introductions and meeting management that we all need to start developing. I just think it's the only way that we're ever going to survive anything else that comes to us. And I believe that racism, anti-Semitism, hatred towards LGBTQ, is just so upsetting to me that we all need to collectively find a way to make our own difference. So I've read your book, Tony, A+, but I decided, it's easy to fall prey to watching Netflix or whatever you're doing and watch, Scandal or whatever we're watching. I do have a list of good shows, but I bought a book called Humankind. And even if you read 1 or 2 pages a night, it makes you realize that these small acts of human kindness can really spread. And I would recommend it to everybody because it really motivates you to think about the small things that can be done to really make a difference. So before your next staff meeting or one-on-one and jumping in there, do the emotional intelligence thing first. And you'll find that you'll find that the people that surround you will be more engaged.
Thank you for that, Assemblywoman. What was the name of that book one more time? And then Steph, if you can look it up and throw it in the chat for our attendees, they can take a look at that as well. What was the name of it again?
It's very simple, Humankind.
Very good. We'll get that in the chat for all of our attendees. Monica and Tony, would you like to weigh in? Monica, go ahead.
Sure. So my perspective again comes from a point where I haven't met my staff in person, and I haven't met my faculty in person, at least only a few. So how do you remain positive, and how do you keep the team positive? I just stepped up communication. My advantage was I had the excuse I need to meet you one-on-one, so we set up a lot of WebEx calls, and I would have 30-minute meetings with my individual meetings with my staff and faculty. It's time consuming, but it's important. And as the Assemblywoman said, you start with how are you doing? How are you managing during these times? And how do you, what can I do to help you? One of the things I do is I try to connect. So I have about 86 staff and faculty within the School of Business that I need to be in touch with somehow. And so what we end up doing is either we have a Friday social, and so it's all about happy times and we keep positive. But also I make it a point to write a message to the entire group at least once every 2 weeks. And the message is not, here's an update and here's what things are going. It really begins with an inspirational message. And so, for example, my last message was, especially at a time when we were struggling with George Floyd's passing and the outcomes of that, was it's a heavy burden on us, and you want to be upfront with that and recognize it. But how do you keep yourself positive? Well, my reminder was, why are we here? Because if we're here to teach and educate, and if we are doing a good job of educating our students, we are creating a generation of students and citizens who are going to be out there helping us solve these problems or these situations that we make the world a better place. And so you've got to be able to take take what is a difficult situation and circle back to where you are, why are we here? What can we, in each of our own ways, do to be able to make a positive difference? And the third thing I would say is, I have to sit back every day at the end of the day and say, how do I keep myself positive? Because I can't wake up the next day and say that the world's difficulties are on our shoulders. It will drag my team down. And so a little bit of deep breaths, and if you can meditate and take some time to just calm yourself before you start the day, goes a long way in creating a positive message.
Yeah.
Tony,
That's
you've got
an
lots of
excellent
experience.
point.
So, I'll just quickly, because I, of course, agree
Absolutely.
with everything that my panelists said here. The only thing that I would add is, I feel like this crisis was very different than most crises I'm sure we've all led before, because it has no end. It's not like a hurricane happens and now we're in cleanup mode and then it has no end, and we don't know when it's going to end. And I feel like I've said this many times in my organization, I'm making a decision today. If I knew it had an end date, I might make a different decision. But because it doesn't, you really have to make decisions with this unknown in front of you, which is not how leaders really like to decide, right? We like to be very confident in what we're doing. And so you've got to be able to be flexible. And I think Dr. Adi, you said this before, and you've got to be able to understand the impact of everything that's going on around you. The other thing about this crisis, when we were going through the Bancroft financial crisis, that was a Bancroft thing, right? And so, I needed help, but it was all Bancroft thing. Bancroft's not going to fix this, right? The state of New Jersey is not going to fix this. Rutgers isn't going to fix this. This is truly a crisis where we need to come out of our comfort zone and lean on each other, right? And really hear what other people are doing and be open to other ideas. And, I think all of this, social injustice and pandemic are so big that it's not going to be solvable by one of us, but it is going to be solvable if we all step up and play a part in it. And I think but both of them, they're not, we don't have a playbook for this, right? We don't know how to solve this, but the fact that we're all so dedicated and compassionate and about doing it, I think makes me feel like we'll come above us. We'll come above this. I think we're strong leaders and we want to do the right thing. But it is going to be together. And so, staying connected and, staying in touch with where people are emotional around all these issues is going to be critical as we move forward. But I know we'll be able to do it. I do.
No, I completely agree with you, Tony, and you're right. I think that is what looms so large over everyone's head, not just people leading organizations, but everyone. It's that there's no end date. I have told several people, and a lot of people know that I worked in the Christie administration during Hurricane Sandy. I thought that there was never a time that I would be involved in such a high level crisis. And this is a whole nother level because that was a perfect example you used. With Hurricane Sandy, the hurricane happened and we immediately went into rebuilding. We knew the steps we had to take to fix the problem. And in this situation, there is no playbook. And so it's frustrating for leaders and just everyone because no one really knows how to proceed. So I think that's a really great point. We have about 10 minutes left in the program. I want to get to one more question for all of you. The pandemic, we're still in it. We're talking about it as if we're coming out of it. We hope we're coming out of it. Who knows what'll happen? But, at the end of the day, this has basically been 3 months of leaders leading during this time. So what would you say is the most difficult issue that you have faced so far during the pandemic? And if you had to go back and do one thing differently since that March 16th time period, what would it be? Tony, we'll start with you.
Thank you. So, to me, other than leading without an end date, which I have to say is one of the most difficult part, for me, I really, and I think this is one of those things, everybody will remember where they were when they realized this was a bigger deal than we thought it was, right? So I was in Key West on a Friday evening, about to go to a wedding, when I was getting all emails of like, we need to shut down, we need to keep everybody in, we got to go into lockdown. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, how are we going to get through this, right? And so, I talked about how, I didn't have it in my toolbox, but my clinical leader did. But from my perspective, so while she was doing that, but with my perspective, I felt like I had to really balance two things. I had to prioritize whatever we needed to do to keep people safe and healthy. I mean, that had to be number one priority. We had to get PPE in here. We had to know how to isolate. And we know how to get, right? At the same time, I had to keep the business running, right? I couldn't just say, all right, let's just stop all the financial piece of this and just focus on this. I mean, we're a large company and people really depend on us. So we had to keep hiring. We had to keep admitting. We had to keep doing that. And again, my team was amazing. Like all of a sudden we are now training staff virtually. And, we are recruiting staff and everybody's like, wow, people are actually home and can take our call. So, I mean, but like, I couldn't let the business stop and put the health and safety, as the only thing we needed to do. So it's really that ability to balance, like what's important today. Today I got to worry about the budget. Today I got to get more money for my staff, right? And it was really that balance, because you can't ever stop the business part. And although sometimes, the business can't be the priority. Would I have done anything different? I'm not sure I can sit here today and say I would have done anything different. We had great success rates. Might I have done a couple things sooner? Perhaps. But, again, I feel very, very strong about how we came through it. We of course had a few cases. Everybody recovered. We got everybody through, and we are ready for the next wave. I mean, we know there's going to be one, and we're ready for it. And I think just having your company ready for whatever's yet to come is all we can ask right now.
Yep, I tend to agree with you, Tony. Monica, would you like to weigh in on that? What is the most difficult issue you've had to navigate during the pandemic? And if there's anything you would do differently, what would that be?
And so, like Tony, I think the continuity of business is really important, and that's been one of the biggest challenges that we're as an academic unit, we're here to serve the students, but at the same time, you got to balance the books, and so with education, as on pause, lack of certainty about what fall is going to look like for students, the uncertainty with our faculty in how to prepare, you're also trying to continue to say, how do we get enrollments? How do we continue to build, our revenue base so that we can subsist in the long run and do what we need to do? And a part of it is I'm a unit. I've got a unit by myself, but then we are part of a larger system. And so when you are hit with budget cuts and changes in what the next year is going to look like, you've got to be really agile in the workplace and find creative solutions. And that agility became a little bit more difficult because I was transitioning into this new role at the time when all of this was going on. I'm not sure what I would do differently. I think you have to change your style. You have to adapt. You've got to respond to the situation. And more than anything, you've got to build trust and have trust in the people who've been around here longer than I have. But I will say also, I think that's also what's made this, I would say, I say this cautiously, interesting, because you really have to think on your feet and you have to think creatively as the situation hits at you. And while it may be really stressful at that moment, you kind of step back at the end of the day and say, you know what, we made the decision that was right considering the circumstances. And I hope in all of this, both myself and my team, more importantly, grew in a way that prepared us for future in a much better way. So you kind of think about it positively and deal with it.
Thank you for that, Monica. Assemblywoman, we're going to leave the last word with you. Would you like to weigh in on how difficult or what was the most difficult issue that you've had to navigate during the pandemic, either, as a legislator or in your day job? And if you could do one thing differently, what would that be?
Well, first of all, I've known Tony for the 16 years. I can't believe it's 16 years. And Monica, I have really thoroughly, we met via Zoom last week, and I have really thoroughly enjoyed listening to you, and Rutgers Camden is really going to benefit by having you. So thank you for choosing Rutgers Camden. You know, I've divided my time, and I think juggling has been the hardest thing. For some reason, while I was out of the home, it was easier to juggle, you know, being who I am, you know, working at Penn, the legislature, and being a mom and a new grandmom. So, you know, so there were three things that really were very impactful to me. My father-in-law, who's 97 years old, turning 98 soon, lost his wife of 75 years in January, and we had to quickly move him into a dementia unit, a new place, and that was challenging. It's only a mile away. It's only a mile away from our house, and we can't see him. And this has been some of the most challenging. Did we have any forethought about, you know, we thought it was going to be the best place for him, but at some point in time, you know, there was no idea, and this transitions into my work at Penn. We had no idea how long this was going to last. I think we can all say that maybe we thought it was going to be a month and a half that we were going to be out. And we planned for only a month and a half. And we should have thought sooner or learned more about what this pandemic could have impacted us and the length of time. So that's something I would have done different. I would have done a little bit more research on my own to understand how long this pandemic could have lasted. The only resource we had was China, and obviously they weren't providing us accurate information. So maybe I would have had my father-in-law live with us, or pulled them out at the right time, like Tony spoke about the families who haven't seen their children. Yeah. So I think that there was a period of time that we thought it was going to be short-lived, and I should have thought better. I think that managing up is still something that I do every single day. And I believe that the legislative leadership didn't think that this was going to be lasting as long. And legislative leadership early on thought we were going to be able to still meet in person. And I had to, you know, because of my experience at Penn, I had to keep on feeding them and say, we can't do that. You're not going to be able to do that. This is why. So telling leadership, you know, within the legislature, I think Christina knows, she gave a good smile, that they can't do something. Well, who are you to tell me? Well, you know, so I had to find a finesse sort of way to remind them that we couldn't do things the normal way. And they listened. So whatever worked there, I'm very proud about. Yeah, so just in closing, I think my house was well stocked with toilet paper, and it was well stocked with food. I don't think that there's anything else that we haven't said collectively as a group of unbelievable, talented, hardworking women, that we can say right now anything more that we would have done differently.
I think that's a good note to close out on. So thank you so much, Assemblywoman. There were a few questions that popped up in the chat towards the end. I'm going to grab them and circulate them to the three of you, if you don't mind. And then we can get that feedback back to the members that did ask questions we didn't have a chance to get to. I really want to thank all of you for spending an hour with us, spending an hour with our members. And, you know, I've said this to Tony, I just said this to Tony yesterday. You know, as someone who is leading an organization for the first time, I guess it's 6 months and 11 days now. But
who's counting?
Yeah, who's counting?
You're doing amazing.
I'm very much a sponge that learn from all of you and take all of your advice and listen very carefully to everyone that has in some way, shape, or form more experience or are mentors to me in some capacity. And I think all three of you absolutely fit in that category. So thank you so much for being with us today, for sharing your thoughts on leadership during a crisis. It's certainly an unprecedented time, and hopefully we'll get through this sooner rather than later. But everyone, thank you so much for being with us on behalf of the members.
Thank you.
That concludes our program. Everyone have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you online soon.
Thank you.
Thank you all.